Great, thanks. So you notice Carmen and I are sandwiching both of these guys, and so we're going to start pushing a bit more on some of the things you said. So let me start by, we talked a lot about expectations and signals and kind of signal setting. You describe, and I love the way Reza, every time we were saying something, Reza would pull out a slide, which is, he's a man to my heart, which is immediately back up with data what you're saying. And so a lot of the story that Reza is telling you can see in the figures, and that's very reassuring. So I want to kind of push a bit more on that and say, it's great that in some sense we have tightened both fiscally and monetarily in a way that we can get more stability, and you're beginning to see the effects of that. So that's kind of the rosier side. The somewhat concerning side, one could imagine, is how did we go about doing that? So in other words, a lot of that is through a reduction in imports, for instance. Now, tied to what Carmen was saying, which is this is an environment where exports may be harder and harder for the reasons Carmen outlined. Now, you could always say, I'm not going to ask Reza or you, when are you going to change interest rates and stuff? We joked about this a bit. But what I'm looking for is, what are the signs, processes, signals you guys are looking at to start moving from a tightening situation to an easing situation? And this is important because there are people in the room who are investors. And when you ask, I bet if I polled a bunch of investors over here and asked them, are you guys ready to invest in Pakistan? I bet if I poll this audience, the answer is probably going to be no. Right? Now, why they're saying no is because they're still concerned whether you're going to consistently continue with your tightening process. Right? Are you done? When will we know you're done? Will you stick to your promises of now that we've tightened our belts, we're going to open things up again and allow for investment to occur? To Carmen's point, allow for domestic savings to mobilize. So again, I'm not looking for specific answers to when, but I'm asking what is the process by which you guys are deciding? What are the tools you're going to be using? And even more importantly, what signals will you send the outside world which will make you guys credible?
So I think both of us can react.
You both are contributing to the fear and the excitement. So,
look, expectations and how they get formed, and what needs to be done is a formidable topic, right? Much better minds have struggled with it. Much better minds have even won Nobel Prizes for it. Okay, so I'll be really humble on this whole issue. As a finance minister, I try to think that, I have at least 4 sets of people or 4 groups whose expectations are important. And whatever one says, whatever one does, it's very important that each one reacts somewhat differently. Okay? And those are, of course, first is the Prime Minister. He has to be managed. His expectations have to be managed, and it's a relationship in which his implicit ideas about the sequencing of certain actions may be different from what prudent economic policy or Carmen-type people might be thinking, right? That's a very important client. That's very important. Player. And by that, I mean, overall government, primarily the Prime Minister. Second is the IMF. Why? Because right now we are in an IMF program, and there are certain formal constraints that we have chosen to impose upon ourselves because they are overall good for the country and for our primary client, which is the people of Pakistan. A third is obviously a very, very critical group who everybody needs and who are really the most critical players because they are the only players. We might be coaches or, managers, but they are the players, and that's the business sector. And their expectations are formed in a different way. Interests are defined in different ways. Their attitude towards what the discount rate might be would be different. And the fourth, is general public, of course, or the people. And a subset of that is a very important component in a democratic society like Pakistan is the media. Because, we have an independent media. We are proud of it. We have about 80 television channels, and every evening between 8 p.m. to 11 p.m., most of them really go after the government. And I think so that is another group that, how they react, because they ultimately are important in shaping the public. So I think one can design policies to try and make the transition somewhat less painful. My worry is that while we have doubled the budget for social safety nets, an important group that doesn't really get benefit of it is the lower middle class. And these are urban and generally or vocal segment of the population. They just miss out from the extreme poverty vulnerable segment, and they also, are not necessarily able to articulate their suffering. And I think inflation in particular is hitting them hard, and that's a source. And I think it's also, Reza can react to that, but I think that the triggers for when the adjustments have to be made, because people are sometimes too keen to declare victory on the stabilization front and want to shift the pedal away from tightening towards, displaying more of a explicitly growth-driven strategy is. But I think that where it matters is what the numbers are going to be on inflation or expected inflation. And I think Reza can talk about how the Monetary Policy Committee actually thinks about it. So I think that's where I would stop and let.
Just before Reza jumps in, just in terms of the
comment.
tools you're thinking of
Yes.
deploying in this case, so, you sidestep a bit of the question, which is, at what stage, what are the signs?
Yeah.
You said the inflation in one sign, but let's look at the fiscal side.
Yes, so
What
on
are
the
you
fiscal
looking
side,
for?
let me say the following. See, austerity is now an ambiguous term, and there are many people who also detest it. But aggressive cost cutting has to be a component of any strategy, no matter what. Okay. So what we've done is we cut down civilian government expenditures by 50 billion. We have frozen the military expenditures. We have not increased the salaries of top civil service people or the top generals. We have cut down the cabinet salaries. We are cutting down different types of programs and, pockets of what we think are waste. That has to continue. Similarly, on the revenue side, we have to keep going for the documentation of the economy, even if it meets resistance from certain business groups. Two areas where we have said we will not compromise is, number one, giving evidence of who you are doing business with by giving the national ID card, because otherwise the chain gets broken and you cannot really corroborate what's happening. And the other is, if you are an exporter but making domestic sales, you have to pay the sales tax, just like every other domestic. And these are very powerful people. They are threatening strikes. They are big players, but we are resisting them. And just want to, add the numbers to what Reza said about the expansion of the base. The total number of taxpayers last year, or the base, was about 1.9 million. That number has been increased in just 14 months to 2.7 million. So an increase of 800,000 over 1.9. And I think that drive has to continue. It's unconnected in any way to what happens.
So I would like to first qualify a little bit the premise of your question regarding growth and how sharp the slowdown might be and whether it's all driven from import compression. And I have a chart for that too. So it is true that imports are playing a part in the reduction of the current account, but a very striking picture is this, which is the exchange rate in red, again the real exchange rate, and export volumes in blue. And it shows that even though dollar proceeds haven't risen, and I'll talk about why that is the case, export volumes have actually begun to grow since the exchange rate began to adjust. The reason for dollar proceeds not having risen as much, although in September they rose 6% year on year, is that the international prices of many of our exports have been falling, and those prices are set in international markets.
That's the point Carmen was making.
Correct. But not only are export volumes growing, they are reasonably diversified. I don't have that chart, but if you decompose volume growth, about half of it is from textiles, but the other half is from other sectors. So what's happening in the economy is, first of all, not a contraction. It's a slowing. And the composition of growth is changing. Export-oriented sectors and import-competing sectors are actually doing well. But those sectors that were domestic-oriented, they were driven for domestic consumption, like construction, like cement, like automobiles, they are not doing as well. But you know, when the real exchange rate changes, and that's the rate of exchange between tradables and non-tradables, that's what you would expect. Mm-hmm. So that's the answer on the first. Second is tightening and when. So
I'm also looking for the word easing eventually, but
yeah, sorry, the word I meant was easing and when.
I hope that wasn't a Freudian slip, but
So you know, I want to share how the MPC thinks about interest rates. And obviously, I can't say what the MPC would do, because if that would be the case, we would not need an MPC. And by the way, I should qualify that the monetary policy.
Tell them.
I should also make clear that the Monetary Policy Committee does not have any membership from government. There is membership from government on the board of the State Bank, but not on the Monetary Policy Committee. So institutionally, that's important. So there are at least three metrics that it looks at, two of which I put more weight on as one member of the MPC, and the third less. So the first is projected inflation, as Hafeez was also saying. And you know, we have announced in our monetary policy statement projected inflation for this fiscal year of 11 to 12%. And the government, for the first time actually, and to its credit, has announced an inflation target of 5 to 7%, a medium-term inflation target in this year's budget. And that's not a coincidence. As an example of coordination between the monetary and fiscal authorities, we put in this 5 to 7% because as we transition to a flexible exchange rate, we need an anchor, a nominal anchor, because the exchange rate is not going to play that role. And therefore, having a target is very important. So first, we look at where our projections are on an 18-month to 24-month horizon compared to this 5 to 7% target. And historically, Pakistan's inflation has actually averaged in that range. Recently, it has gone up for the factors that I mentioned. So that's the first thing we look at. The second thing we look at is real interest rates on a forward-looking basis. And by that, I mean taking the nominal policy rate and subtracting from it projected inflation, not actual inflation, which is lagged inflation, but projected inflation. And when that being 11 to 12%, implied real interest rates are 1 to 2%. Historically, our real interest rates have been around 3%. And we feel that slightly less than that is appropriate right now because the cycle is in a softening patch right now because activity is slowing. So we look at real interest rates on a forward-looking basis, and we use headline inflation, not core, and some people have questioned that, and I just want to take this occasion to point out that of the 40-plus countries that IMF identifies as inflation targeters, which is where we would want to be, 95% of them use headline inflation for the purposes of the inflation target. So we are very much in line with what they are doing. The third area that we look at, but which I personally put less weight on, is measures of output gap. Because calculating an output gap, for those of you who are economists, is a heroic exercise, even in advanced economies. For those of you who follow, output gaps calculated in the euro area were massively revised over the course of just 2-3 years. So, but particularly projected inflation and real interest rates is where we look at. I just want to, in 1 minute, just address one point that Carmen said about our reliance on China. And just wanted to clarify for the sake of the audience that, the China and the external dependency on China issue, first of all, has to be looked in its totality. And the way to look at it is, what is our external financing need in percent of GDP, and how does it compare to other emerging markets? That number is 9% of GDP. And in the IMF's debt sustainability analysis framework, the danger levels start at around above 15% of GDP. And so I wanted to say that while, yes, we have dependency on some external creditors, where we are right now in the aggregate is actually not that high. Second is, I think, the point that Carmen made, and we take that to heart, which is diversification of our external funding sources. And with the planned issuance of a sovereign bond and tapping international commercial markets, I think our plan is also to diversify our external funding.
If I can also just comment on the China. See, in this country, in some circles, not you included in that, there is a lot of myth-making about, the Chinese economic relationship with Pakistan. And everything, and sometimes a sinister twist is put on it. When in fact, if you look at the portfolio of things that are being done, they mainly involve, I would say, 4 things. First, there's a port, and that port is going to really contribute towards trade between Pakistan and China and Central Asia and Africa. And it's just like any other port. It's not meant for Chinese use exclusively or anything like that. Why China is interested in that port is because, their energy supplies right now go 60 to 80% of those through the Malacca Straits. That's very long route. If looking ahead, they can find a way to get it to the Khwaja port and then have a link through Western China into the eastern cities of Tianjin and Shanghai, the costs are a lot less. Also, they do worry about the income distribution gap between the developed parts of China and Western China. So they would like, to have links between Western China and connectivity. And if this helps, it makes sense from their point of view. But from our point of view, it's a port. We would like everybody to use it. And if there's a road, we would like everybody to use it. And in fact, only if the capacity utilization of this infrastructure is high, with everyone using it, the benefits will flow. The second, apart from the road, are electricity plants. Again, we've had energy shortages in the past, and that's in line with the growth requirement for electricity, and they contribute. The other is creation of economic zones. If they are created, and they are in very early stages of being created, the idea is not just to be exclusively China-oriented, is to open it for everybody else. So the way, and that's everybody's mission is the same. I was having detailed meetings in the World Bank during the Fund Bank meetings with 4 ministers from Central Asia on how to improve connectivity between Central Asia and South Asia. China was not in the picture, and there was no sinister twist to that, and World Bank was sitting kind of in a good way, moving the discussion along. So I think your comment about hidden debt is extremely important in a way to figure out what your real vulnerability or dependency is. Your comment about worrying about private debt is extremely important, as we all discovered during the East Asian crisis, that how it can invite trouble, if not really so. I appreciate those comments. Yeah.
We're
Can
just
I,
pretty much on time. Yeah, I want
to. Let me just say that continuing on the theme of external, I think that, and going to your question of easing, okay, which they notice they didn't say easing very, but the external environment is one in which the Fed has another rate of round cuts in the pipeline, and I think Asia I'm generalizing, but the move is towards more accommodation. Korea slowed down significantly. Singapore has slowed down significantly. China slowed down. And, you know, every time I say China, people say, it's not sinister, it's just big. So you have also very big repercussions. And I think that also has, you know, the scope for more accommodation without getting, you know, the problem is, of course, if you ease unilaterally, the exchange rate will depreciate, inflation will come back up. That's not the scenario that, just to end on that.
Reza, you're smiling. You seem like you want to react to that, and I want to open up because we're running out of time.
Yeah, I just want to clarify that monetary policy in Pakistan is on wait and see right now. It's data-driven, so we will see what the next bunch of data tell us about inflation projections and real interest rates, and then we'll decide.
So you're happy to sit behind the process of the signs for easing and when easing will occur, but right now you're holding your judgment on whether those signs are showing up.
That's right, and I'm very envious of all the other central bankers that, you know, we're just coming from the annual meetings. And the problems that they have, I wish I had those problems because they have low inflation and we have high inflation. And they are looking at low for long, low interest rates for long periods of time, and we have high for now. So I wish we had their problems, and soon, inshallah, we will.
And you know, and even their bosses are still not happy with the low interest rates. I was when we had our meeting with President Trump, you know, I had planned to ask him a question. And my question was...
He tweeted your response back, I assume.
My question was, Mr. President, this was in our bilateral meeting, can you please tell us, especially our Prime Minister, how you managed to create so many jobs?
On that note, let's open up.
He was like, and you know what he said?
Build a wall.
He said, that's a really good question. And then he said, you know what? I can create many more jobs. But I have a complete idiot as the chairman of the Fed. And he doesn't reduce the interest. And I thought, please don't give ideas to our Prime Minister. I was thinking of poor Reza back home.
So let's open up the same rules as I said earlier. Quick questions, make your question be a question. I'll take a few rounds and I'll go around the room. Go ahead. 1, 2. Start. If you could just very briefly introduce yourself, just name who you are, a title, and then just question.
Hasnan
If you
Aslam.
guys write down, we're just going to take 3 or 4 questions.
I think many of you know me. My name is Hasnan. 2 quick questions. One, do you feel, both Reza as the governor of the central bank and the finance minister, that in Pakistan you have access to the data you need to inform the right policy decisions? Because the policies you make, particularly in the Western world, are heavily data dependent. And second, the topic here of the discussion is unlocking Pakistan's growth. I think we spent a lot of time talking about the twin deficits and all the good work you're doing to address that. And then there was a lot of discussion around easing, I guess, coming back to growth. But another way to spur long-term growth, as I think has also been discussed, is focus on domestic productivity growth. What specifically is the government's policy to spur that productivity growth, and sort of not just in the immediate term, but more in the medium to longer term?
Thanks. Please go ahead. I'll swivel around the room.
Thank you. My name is Matthew Vogel. I work for a Dubai-based fund manager, FIM Partners. We're an investor in Pakistan for about 5 years now. I was going to make the same point about the data. So I think that's a really critical issue, and generally transparency. And one thing that foreign portfolio investors are very concerned about is hidden debt, specifically circular debt. I'm a student of the circular debt problem, and I'm struggling to get data to analyze it. But I do know that IPPs are given 20% dollar guaranteed returns, and that the Chinese were given similar levels of guaranteed dollar returns. If that's the case, why can't you just publish a report which says, this is the quasi-fiscal responsibility that we face from the circular debt problem?
You thought we were going to be the tough ones. Please go ahead. 1, 2, and I'm just going to circle. We'll take 2 more, and then I'll start circling to this
Hi,
side.
my name is Mohammed Ahmed. I'm a PhD student at the Fletcher School in economics. My question to the finance minister is, how much of the constraints come from political economy? Because it seems like the most binding constraints for Pakistan seem to be coming from political economy, particularly in the cotton context, which is the most important sector for us. We've lost about 20% of the cultivated land in cotton to sugarcane, and then we're subsidizing sugarcane to export it, so it seems like a double whammy. So how much of this constraint is coming from the political economy because of vested interests in sugar, and are you taking these as given, or?
I wonder if Jahangir, you want to answer that one. We'll take last question and then move back to the audience.
My name is Syed Reza Mohsen. I just wanted to ask you, we've recently seen that there is some interest in Pakistan rupee-based T-bills from foreign investors. And we've seen an inflow of around $500 million in the past 3 months. Would that be a consideration, in making a policy decision going forward, whether to, use interest rates locally instead of issuing Eurobonds? Thank you.
Great, thank you. Why don't we respond? Not everyone has to respond to anything, so pick a question.
Yeah. So I'll just respond to a couple questions and let Reza deal with the access to the data, since he's claiming to be data-driven and I'm deciding totally randomly. So I think...
See, the love is beginning to frazzle slightly. I told you, it just takes some time.
No, I'm just being modest. You always use the data, the best data you can, and you always try to improve the quality of the data you can. And there's a lot of effort in that direction with the Bureau of Statistics and all that. And I think what I want to do is just try and answer this question of domestic productivity. Obviously, that's at the heart of any growth strategy. Atif Mia's here, he's been hammering this thing since the first time we met him, and I think our professors did it, long time back also. So what are we attempting to do? First is we are trying to get rid as much as possible from government participation in businesses by accelerating our privatization program, because we believe that if government ministers are doing policy making, regulation, ownership of assets and management of assets, there are too many conflicts of interest, and everyone knows, what that does. The last time we had privatization was in 2006, when I was Minister for Privatization. I quit in 2006, and in 13 years, 0 privatization has taken place. So we want to start, accelerating that process, and we are doing that. Second, we are taking really serious steps in making business easy. And the new World Bank report that's just coming out, or has come out, is going to identify Pakistan as one of the top 6 performers who have improved the most in this year on that. And they will give you the indices on which we have done well. So we are working very hard with the business sector. Third, agriculture has been mentioned here, and as I said, we have taken a lot of important decisions to unleash the potential of enhancing agriculture productivity, both by better water resource management as well as by identifying specific crops where we need to do more. And the other question about circular debt, I don't think that there is a deliberate effort to try and keep circular debt as a hidden debt, as a mystery, okay, because it serves some governmental purpose. These numbers are constantly discussed and debated with international agencies and between government departments. As I said, the circular debt that was being added to the stock was 38 billion rupees a month. We now claim as a government that that number has been brought down to roughly 10 billion a month, which is a dramatic, improvement. And I challenged the World Bank day before yesterday that if their numbers are different, let us have a discussion. And their number was supposed to be 12 to 16 billion a month. So this is being discussed, and I've told them I want a single number on which the bank, the fund, and the government of Pakistan, Ministry of Finance and Ministry of Electricity agree. So hopefully that will be done, and I'll give you my WhatsApp, and you can be in touch with me, and I'll share that with you also, okay? So there should be no mystery in that, especially if you are a participant. There is a problem that the contracts with the IPPs, who are very powerful people in the country, are very, very favorable to them because they are in dollar terms. And it creates a lot of resentment in society. On the other hand, legally, they have the upper hand, and nobody wants to tinker around with trying to adjust or renegotiate legal contracts. So it does sometimes create a problem because the collection efficiency of the distribution companies does not match what they are required to pay. And the Ministry of Finance has to cough in, as you said, quasi-public responsibility. But the Ministry of Finance has a habit of taking its time when it comes to giving money. And I think that's something
Great, Reza,
I'm not really encouraging at this point. Finally, on the cotton versus sugar, you are right, that sugar has received maybe certain treatment and it is more water intensive and so on. But this issue is now continuously under discussion. There was a proposal that, okay, how do you actually incentivize people to grow more cotton? And we almost came very close to giving an indicative price. But then,
I thought the answer is get rid of the sugar subsidy.
but
Isn't that
then there are no sugar subsidies, okay? So let us be clear, and I think Jahangir maybe should stand up and tell us, Jahangir Tareen is here.
So, Jahangir, you're welcome to comment.
He's one of Pakistan's, he has the distinction of being one of Pakistan's best agriculturists and as well as the owner of sugar mills. So I think
I traveled halfway across the world. I'm still haunted by the sugar and cotton question. The thing is, people should understand that relative pricing is what motivates farmers to plant crops. So sugarcane has a fixed support price, which was artificially kept too high. Wheat also had had artificially high support price. These are the only two crops in Pakistan with support prices, and the area under them both went up dramatically. The price of sugarcane does not benefit sugar mill owners, it benefits sugarcane farmers. And if a subsidy is given for export, which has been given in some years in the past, it is driven because of the high cost of sugarcane. What's the solution? There should be no support price of sugarcane. It should be a market-driven thing, and therefore, cotton will have the same advantages as sugarcane and vice versa. The farmers will plant crops where they make money. Cotton has been let down by Pakistan because the investment due in cotton and research had never been made. For the last 20 years, we're still debating whether to get Monsanto into Pakistan or not. India decided 25 years ago that they will go along with the rest of the world and get cotton research and GM seed into the country. And now they have exponentially grown their cotton production. Pakistan did not do that, and they're suffering for that, consequences of that. We are now working very hard on cotton research, but that takes time. Until we get the cotton research right, your area under cotton will not go up because farmers will not make any money. The other important thing is that the real loss of area of cotton has been to maize, not sugarcane except 1 year. Sugarcane cultivation has gone down by 30% in the last 2 years. And with maize has grown by about 20%. So the area lost in the last 2 years is from cotton to maize and other crops like rice. So farmers make money and they plant the same crop, they increase area of that crop. If they don't make any money, the area goes down. So when we fix prices, and this is something that you need to do in the ECC, is that prices of different crops should be relative to each other, and the profitability should be looked at. If you take one crop too high, you distort the economy.
Also tell them that sugarcane prices are not, support prices are not set by the federal government.
And this is another anomaly. Agriculture is a provincial subject, so sugarcane prices are set by the provinces. And that leads to other distortions. So they set the prices, but they are not responsible for the export. And then they come to the federal government for a subsidy for export. So these things with the new financial team will, inshallah, work out.
Thanks, Jagir. Appreciate it. Reza, you want to take on the access transparency of data?
Yeah, sure. So I think on data, obviously more data the better, but I'll give you some concrete examples where it would be particularly helpful. One is quarterly GDP. We don't have it. The work is underway towards it. If we have it, it'll really help us. Some of the existing sources of data also are not that great. Like, for instance, the LSM index, the large-scale manufacturing, is actually not a very good predictor or indicator of activity. For instance, in textiles, it primarily looks at low value-added textiles and does not put weight on garments and other high value-added sectors. So, they're doing, so we are very cautious in looking at that. One thing at the State Bank that we've been doing, which is actually very helpful, is a lot of new survey data that we are collecting. And that's an area where we're going to push more, because as the regulator of banks, we can get banks to report data from their clients, which can be useful for us for looking at activity. I think on productivity, I have one topic that I feel is extremely important and is relevant for price stability, which is competition. Because competition basically means lower prices for the same things and higher quality products for the same price. And I feel in many sectors, competition is not where it should be. And it needs to be, we need a more of a level playing field for our companies to be able to compete in the international markets. I'll give you an example. EBITDAs of 30% being sustained in cement for years. Such high numbers cannot be sustained if there is free entry and if there are no barriers to entry. And so I think the work that the Domestic Competition Authority can do towards breaking down formal or informal barriers to entry, tacit collusion, other things, would go a long way to make the productivity higher and allowing us to compete internationally, which is critical for us to generate growth. On the T-bills, I think it's important to put it in context. Investments by non-resident in T-bills is a form of portfolio investments. Pakistan has historically had a lot of portfolio investments. For some reason, they've always gone into equities. What we pointed out was that actually it's the same plumbing you use for going into treasuries, and our treasury market is actually very large. One auction can be easily $1 billion US. Average daily turnover is $700 million US. So we would like actually there to be some competition in the sector for treasury bills. Right now, the market is captive by local banks. And if we get funds to participate, that's good for reducing the cost of debt for the government, but also from a market infrastructure perspective. And our longer-term interest is actually the capital market development, for which greater participation by non-resident funds is going to help. Pakistani corporates right now find it very difficult to get long-term rupee funding. And if we can develop the yield curve such that we have deep pockets further out and we have participation from non-residents such that there is more turnover, it will provide a stable source of funding for banks, for corporates, for long-term rupee funding, which we think will help with productivity as well.
Great. Carmen, you want to comment?
Very quickly, on the issue of what data could be provided, I think a very useful, and I will keep harping on this issue of really good debt stocks in terms of existing liabilities, because you have the private sector coming in to buy a bond. How do you price the bond if you don't know exactly what the level of debt is? Furthermore, where you are in the pecking order in terms of seniority. That is very important because official creditors historically are senior. So I think that's important, and it's connected actually to the question on the development of the T-bills. The only thing, and I share the view that that's both desirable, that the diversification, if you're relying less on, meaning the government, on funding from the traditional loans from the central bank, develop an alternative makes, bigger to a broader audience is very important. And I, being the person that's focused on crises for a lifetime, I have to say that the same things I said about Chinese debt would apply to the treasury market and the private sector as well. Private, when they will be all too willing to fund, and especially if things go well. You know, there is the siren song of the capital markets as well, which I also, you know, always caution against, you know, too much of a good thing, meaning it's good to cultivate foreign investors. It's good to go that route of issuing debt, but, you know, don't get over optimistic on, you know, that demand will not run out on you very quickly. You know, and if any shock hits.
Great, thanks, Carmen. So I'm going to switch to this side of the room now. Why don't we start with here? If the person would like, a gentleman over here, gentleman up there, and then I'm going to start moving here. Let's do a quick rapid round. We'll do a very rapid. We're already over time, but if it's okay with people, I'm going to take an extra 10 minutes. If you need to leave quietly, just leave on the side. It's fine. No one's going to stare at you. But let's just stay till about 7:15 or so. Go ahead.
Yes, Sam Hakim from Fidelity Investments. So you spoke a lot about the current account deficit, the headwinds you were facing for the past 5 years. But there's been also a lot of backwind to support you from low oil prices that are, you know, probably at a very low historic levels. You also had interest rates that are sometimes in negative territory worldwide. So all these things are happening, and from the graph that you showed, the growth rate is about 3% for the past 5 years. So if these things were to turn around, you're not in a good spot. So my question to you is, you focus a lot on the current account deficit. Have you looked at other opportunities about poverty alleviation? And what is it we can learn from the examples of India, Brazil in that context, where you could probably achieve a higher growth by using the fifth set of policies?
Thank you. In the middle, up and down, and I'm going to start moving here. Yep.
Hi, my name is Hamza. So my question is regarding switching from an import-led growth model towards an export-led model. So my question is, how effective do you think it is for Pakistan to actually switch from an import-led model towards an export-based model in terms of growth? And the second part of the question is in terms of an informal economic sector in Pakistan. How do you think, so are there any plans of the government to basically demonetize in order to regulate the informal economic sectors to basically achieve growth in the future?
Given the brilliant experience in India.
In India, yes.
Thrilled about
the
that.
comparison would be great.
Please, person right up here, and then we start moving. Yep.
Hi, my name is Jalal. I'm a PhD fellow at the Pardee Rand Graduate School. My question is on Pakistan's continued presence in the grey list of the Financial Action Task Force. What's the action plan, and what's the timeline that you see of Pakistan getting in the white list?
Great, thank you. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we'll stop over here. 1, 2, 3, 4. Stop.
Hi, hi. My name is Faiz. I'm at HBS. We're at a growth talk right now, and we haven't spoken about digital yet. In terms of Pakistan and growth, what are all of your ideas about growth and how we can specifically use digital in maybe tax collection? Is that something that we're looking at, including growth and productivity? Is just what your plans are around that?
Person behind.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Majid. I'm a local investor here. I wanted to know if the government of Pakistan has any plan to sell off some of the land, government-owned land, to overseas Pakistani to get some revenue. Thank you so much.
Hi, my name is Aizan at the business school. A very quick question to Reza about one of your slides on the reserves chart, the one in blue with the IMF in pink. there were clear cycles in the reserve buildup and then drawdown. There was an uncanny correlation between that and the government cycles. Clear inflection points were 2008, 2013, 14, 2018, 19. It almost seemed like every government builds up the reserves and then brings them down. First of all, is there any causation in this correlation? And if so, you talked about how this tenure would be different and this time will be different. How will this chart be different?
Hi there, my name is Rushan. I've got two questions primarily for Reza. First is on the financial inclusion. So since the state bank is the banking regulator as well, so are we doing anything to increase the bank population, especially because people have different, SBP did a survey a few years ago, people have different cultural preferences, not everybody wants to bank conventional banking. So are we doing something about that? And more specifically on the agriculture sector, because our productivity growth has been flat. So what are we doing to help small, medium-sized farmers? And secondly, from a monetary policy point of view, what are the transmission mechanisms you primarily look at in terms of that will drive inflation down or up from your policy, given that we don't have a lot of consumers taking up as a proportion of total credit creation?
Great. We'll take one last question, gentlemen, over here, and then we'll turn back.
Thanks. My name is Richard, and I'm a friend of the Myangal family, former royal family of Spot. Also, for the past 15 years, I've been trying to persuade an investor overseas to invest in a historic site in Massachusetts, a historic copper mill. And I see in the news that the particular person that I had approached is the controlling shareholder of a company named Tethian. And so I was wondering if you could say anything about Recodec.
What?
Oh, the Luxich family. I was trying to persuade them to buy the Paul Revere mill. And instead, I see that they're currently an important shareholder in the Tethian Recodec project. And so could you tell us about the impact of Recodec?
Okay, let's open up.
I think now that the graduate students have taken over, I should, right, begin to be even more modest, right? Okay, first, the question on current account deficit. The reason I highlighted it because that was posing a real threat. We cannot print dollars. And if you are in a situation where imports are 60 billion and exports are 20 billion, and it does pose a problem. And like somebody pointed out, if the reserves are depleted and you are in a particular situation, it really does worry anybody who is trying to think about. So it's not theoretical that let's talk about growth and not think about something else that is an immediate threat. So you're making a very valid point about adopting strategies for longer-term growth, but you have to first get out of the ICU into the general ward before you can say, let's start running. So I think our first goal was, and that was the reason I highlighted that, because without getting the macro situation to be stable, it's like just theoretical to talk about aggressive growth strategies when you first need to really tackle the very immediate threat. But your point is well taken, and I think part of this discussion has been in how to try and introduce elements of a medium to longer term growth strategy and combine them with immediate measures for stabilization. I think the question about shifting from import to export-led growth, these terms are so, how should I put it? The real world is never so precisely import versus export. But I think if you keep a policy of overvalued exchange rates, it does end up subsidizing imports implicitly. And it does work against, providing the right incentive. So we are trying in a way to correct that with a combination of getting the exchange rate to be more market-driven, and it's finding a certain place where exports are finally beginning first to increase in volumes and now in dollar terms, and by giving subsidies to exporters. So we do not subsidize hardly anybody except the exporters in terms of lower electricity prices, lower gas prices, and certain types of loans. So it's a formidable task, but I think that's in a way where we are also attempting to be heading. On the digital, there is a new person that has been, in the list of institutions that we are trying to develop, a person from a very reputable top technology firm from Silicon Valley has been hired to be the chief digitization officer, and her mandate is to try and accelerate the process within different departments of the government. On the IRS side, we are trying to shift towards a model of dealing with taxpayers in which the FBR, the IRS officials, are not involved because they have been a source of corruption and loss of confidence. So what we've done, for example, for refunds of export sales tax, we have introduced a system in which it's all driven without any involvement of face-to-face action with anybody. So something that could take months and involve a lot of corruption, now you just have to fill your form and, in a computer, and within 72 hours, the money is refunded to you in your bank account. So I think this is a dramatic improvement. There were hiccup problems, but those have been largely overcome. So that's the route we are trying to take. Yes, there are proposals to try and identify pockets of government-owned land, both in the provinces and in Islamabad, and to market them towards expatriate Pakistanis. We have to realize that expatriate Pakistanis are smart, economic, and rational, economic agents. And there is no way to, quote, trick them, through some kind of a plan based solely on patriotism, right? So we have to ensure that whatever methods are adopted are defensible in terms of being available to other citizens of Pakistan also, but also to try and offer certain type of instruments which are dollar denominated, foreign exchange denominated, or give them some kind of an advantage. I think on FATF, the whole set of institutions in the country are united to try and get out of the gray list, and everybody's working hard to do whatever it takes. On Recodec, this is a very big mine in Balochistan, which has both copper and gold, and it's one of the best mines in the entire world. Hardly any other single mine comes close to it. So it's been in a place where there are negotiations going on to try and get this mine to start operating and start, it's no good if the gold and copper stay inside the ground wherever they have been. So hopefully you'll hear some positive movement on that.
Great, thanks. Reza?
Yes, Reza.
Since you said that questions are now coming from graduate students, I forgot to say something I wanted to say at the very beginning, which is that we are hiring. So in the spirit of public service,
now that they've asked the question, we're revealing this.
If any of you are interested to go back and serve, the State Bank is there, where it's open doors, so you should come and contact me.
And the State Bank gives better salaries than other places.
We promise to give you a good run, and we really want good people. So now, on the questions, first was regarding, we are actually we have not made the most of what we've had. And I think you are right to some extent that we need institutional changes to be able to do more. with what we have. For instance, the last program that the IMF had, got helped a lot by low oil prices. But we didn't use that time to actually strengthen our export-oriented sectors. And the exchange rate policy had a lot to do with it, because the overvalued exchange rate is a tax on exporters. The other key issue, I think, that has depressed investment in Pakistan is a fundamental question regarding the sustainability of its economic finances. 7, 8 months ago, the question in Pakistan was whether we'll have default. And if there is a homegrown plan, why is it not there, and what is it? So our whole strategy is to move that tail risk just completely off of the table by having a program with the IMF. The IMF does not lend and cannot lend as a matter of policy unless it can certify to its board that there are good prospects that it will be repaid by Pakistan. And that means that its staff have made the judgment that we are going to have access to sufficient sources of financing to not have any kind of default going forward. So I think once you give that message of sustainability and you do some institutional changes, you lay the groundwork for making better use of the hands that you are dealt with than before. And that is the goal of the economic policymakers. Switching to exports-oriented growth rather than, I'll give you some anecdotes that it is beginning to happen. For the first time in its history, Pakistan is going to export tractors to Africa. Millet Tractors is doing that. It's never happened. Exchange rate has helped. Pakistan is beginning to export auto parts to Germany. That has never happened either. So the exchange rate helps up to a point, but beyond that, there has to be an improvement in competitiveness. And that was my point about competition. Because if you cannot compete domestically, you will not be able to compete internationally. And those are the institutions that have to change. On demonetization, I am less, I'm more equivocal on the experience, because although the way India did it was not the best because they were not prepared. But if you look at all indicators of participation of the people in the digital economy, they have gone through the roof. India's ratio of deposits has gone up considerably. It's, so in hindsight, I think there are actually some useful lessons to be learned on how to increase inclusion. In Pakistan, we've been hurt very badly by the withholding tax on bank transactions, because ever since that tax came into place, if you draw the ratio of cash to deposits, you will see a structural break in that line, and it begins to go up. And so we don't have savings in the banking system, and one reason is some of these things that are out there. Digital has not only a lot of potential for things like tax collection, but also we are now trying to make a push on digital payments and fintech, and you will be hearing more of that in the coming months. Somebody asked a question about why next time it might be different on the chart on reserves and IMF programs. Comes back to the point I was making on making a genuine and lasting commitment to a flexible exchange rate regime. Because if you do that, and there is wide ownership in stakeholders of that, next time you have pressure, it's the exchange rate that will be the shock absorber and not reserve loss that will bring us out. I think financial inclusion, we do very poorly on that, not only in general, but also when you look at gender. Our women, the ratio of our working age adult women who have deposits is one of the lowest. And it's also not to do with the religion, as some people think, but even Iran, Indonesia, Malaysia, they all have deposit ratios of women several times higher than ours. We have a lot of work to do there. State Bank has some schemes that it is promoting, but it is clearly an area where we want to focus more once we have the stability side of the story firmly under our belt. Since May, we've been very much focused on ensuring that all that we are doing on the external front, the exchange rate and everything is secure. And now our reserves are actually growing, and I'm talking non-borrowed reserves or net international. Once we, and now we're getting some more time from that story. So we want to focus on these things and to make them better. I think the last question that I had was on the monetary policy transmission. And you're right that consumer finance from banks is actually low, but there is consumer finance from stores, from retailers, which still is not that big. But the bigger channels of monetary transmission are the following. First is the actual and perceived wealth effect. So interest rates have an effect on real estate market, they have an effect on the stock market, and more generally, they have an effect in the entire country through the media, because whenever the monetary policy raises interest rates, the characterization is such that I think it scares everybody from consuming. So that's one. But the other is the exchange rate, and that is a reasonably well-documented channel. We have seen that the growth of foreign currency deposits, which was on a steady uptrend, has stopped recently. And we think that interest rates have had some role to play in that. And by having that effect on the exchange rate, that is one channel through which it affects inflation.
Well, thanks for the comment.
Two very, very quick points. Someone here brought up the issue of tax collection. I cannot emphasize how important really rethinking the tax system and new sources of tax are in this context, for two reasons. I've seen this movie many times where countries, in the process of becoming more developed and financially integrated, reduce their reliance on export duties and tariffs and so on. So but the dark side of that, it's a loss in revenue. And secondly, countries that have relied on seniorage and the inflation tax decide, well, we're going to stabilize for real. And I'm not talking just emerging markets. I'm talking about Italy and Greece fall into and the substitution for the customs taxes and for the inflation taxes has been debt, not another new tax source. And those episodes often don't end happily. And one very last thing on I have to react to the reserves chart. I think and I agree that part of the problem of the seesaw was the fixity of the exchange rate. But part of it, and this is a plug to myself, is also the this time is different syndrome. That after a couple of good years, you begin to treat the favorable growth environment as permanent and you overspend. Something happens, your budget deficit is larger than planned, and financing from the central bank became the norm. And that, of course, meant, downward pressure on the reserves, instability for the exchange rate. So, message, don't get overly optimistic. Never think, that the good news are permanent. Limiting external borrowing is also, in addition to a floating exchange rate, a safeguard to maintaining reserves, because you may not end up losing reserves because you're supporting an exchange rate, but because you're actually using the reserves to pay levels of external debt that were built up very quickly. So.
Great, thanks. So we're desperately out of time now. So let me close the session. I just wanted to say, first of all, I wanted to thank all three participants. This has been fun. It's always hard to do these things to kind of keep engaging. You guys have kept us engaged with, for a lot of the audience, extremely dry and boring stuff in many ways. But hopefully we're beginning to see kind of the seriousness of how we're approaching this stuff.
Reza is holding a separate seminar after this.
I should say, I wanted to echo one thing Carmen said, which is, look, at the end, we are facing, I think, the kind of negative, but not so negative external environment. But there is a, if you will, silver lining to that, which also Carmen mentioned, which is, in finance, whenever there's kind of opportunities like this, we're always thinking arbitrage, right? And so the question is, can one place Pakistan in an environment, because there's lots of money waiting to be spent as well. There's fear, but there's also lots of pent-up desire to kind of find that shining star, that unicorn. And the question back to us would be, can Pakistan do those kind of things? Can we take those observable, visible, costly, credible actions that would convince some of the skeptics to say, this is a country which can actually have that opportunity, this is a country which is worth investing in, not just, as you guys said, for some patriotic reason, but simply for the reason of it just makes good sense, it's good business. And I think the more we can sort of create that, perhaps we can turn around kind of the story of our uptake or gradual uptake into miracles. I'm hopeful of that. We all can aspire to that, but at the same time, I think it's important not to get carried away, to be realistic, to signal the seriousness we have as an economy and as leaders of the economy. So again, thank you for sharing your time. Thank you guys for sharing your time. Good night.